Hello students, this is a lesson on absolute value equations. We're starting up our last unit of the year, and with a little quick review first of absolute value, and then we'll talk about how to solve equations. Right? The first thing, if you'll remember, that absolute value of a number is simply its distance from zero. The distance a number is from zero. Okay, hopefully you remember that. Nice and easy. All right. The next thing is we need to look at is the absolute value of x is denoted using these bars. Let me put the x inside. It's always positive because it's a distance, because it asks how far from zero, not in which direction, but how far. Okay? Simple as that. Now let's use that, what we just reviewed, to help us solve some absolute value equations. Okay? Now if we want to take the absolute value of some variable x and we want the answer to be 3, what that means is the distance x is from 0 has got to equal 3. Well, if here is 0, we want to go 3 to the right. 1, 2, 3. There is our answer. So the answer is going to be 3, but we also have another value that's 3 units from 0 to the left. 1, 2, and 3. So it could also be -3. So we have two answers. So if I take the absolute value of 3, that gives me 3, or the absolute value of -3. Right? Absolute value equations are always going to work this way, where you're going to end up with two answers. So let's talk about how do we solve absolute value equations. Well, the first step is to get rid of the absolute value bars, is to isolate the absolute value onto one side of the equation. So I want to solve it to get the absolute value onto one side of the equation. Secondly, is I want to split the equation into two possible equations. One that's positive and one that's negative. So we're going to have two equations to give us two answers. Okay? If you need a little bit longer to write that down, go ahead and take it. Now let's go ahead and solve an example. Alright? Let's look at this example. I want to solve the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 7. So the first step is to isolate the absolute value on one side of the equation. Well, it's isolated. I got the absolute value of x plus 2. So the next thing is I'm going to write two equations, one positive, one negative. So I'm going to write x plus 2 equals 7. That's my first equation. And my second equation I'm going to write as x plus 2, but I'm going to make it negative, put a negative out in front, and make that equal to 7. And then I'm going to solve each of these. Right? So I'll start by solving this one, subtract 2 from both sides, and that gives me x equals 5. And then this one, since I have this negative on the outside, there's two things I can do. Number one is I can distribute that negative in, or I can think of it as -1, and I can divide both sides of the equation by -1, and that gives me x plus 2 equals, that's -1, equals -7. So then I subtract 2 from both sides and get x equals -9. So I have two answers. One is x equals 5 and the other one's x equals 9. Just to show you where those answers are on where they are on the number line, let's go ahead and plot the points. So x equals 5, that's one solution, and x equals -9, that's another solution. And that's how I would graph that. We could also put these back in here. 5 plus 2 is 7. The absolute value of 7 is 7. Or plug in -9. -9 plus 2 is -7, but the absolute value of -7 is 7, because -7 is 7 spaces away from 0. Alright, let's look at a second example. Alright, this example we have the absolute value of 3x minus 2 equals 1. So as you can see, it's already solved for the absolute value, so I'm going to write it as two equations. 3x minus 2 equals 1, and 3x minus 2, but I have to take the negative of that, equals 1. So I will go ahead and solve the one on the left, add 2 to both sides, and I get 3x equals 3, divide by 3, and get x equals 1. Let's look at the second equation. Since I have this negative, I'll treat it like a negative 1. I'll divide both sides by negative 1. And that gives me 3x minus 2 equals 1 divided by negative 1 is negative 1. So then I'll add 2 to both sides. Same steps I did over here. And that gives me 3x. Now this time, negative 1 plus 2 is positive 1. Then divide by 3, divide by 3, and x equals 1/3. That's my second solution. If I want to graph these, I can put points at x equals 1, x equals 1, and x equals 1/3. Right, and then I can plug those in, put 1 in. 3 times 1 is 3 minus 2, and that would give me 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. Put 1/3 in there. 3 times 1/3 is 1. 1 minus 2 is negative 1. The absolute value of negative 1 is 1, so it still works also. Alright, so there's 2 examples. Let's look at one more example, and this one we're going to have to do a little bit more to solve to get that absolute value by itself. Okay, with this one, I have the absolute value of 2x minus 3, then I have minus 4 equals 3. So the first thing is I need to get the absolute value by itself, so I'll add 4 to both sides. And that gives me the absolute value of 2x minus 3 equals 7. And now the absolute value is all by itself, so we've solved for the absolute value. Now I want to go through and break into 2 equations and find my answer. So I have 2x minus 3. I'm going to take the positive one, equal to 7, and then I'm going to do 2x minus 3. But I have to make that the negative, and that's going to equal 7. So over here I can add 3 to both sides and get 2x equals 10, divide by 2, and x is going to equal 5. I can solve this one, treat that like minus 1, divide both sides by negative 1. I'm going to work up here at the top, so that'll give me 2x minus 3. Now instead of equaling 7, it's going to equal negative 7. And then add 3 to both sides. You probably could do this all by yourself. Get 2x equals negative 4, divide by 2, and get x equals negative 2. I could come down here and plot my answers on a number line, 2 and 5, and there's my solutions. And I put the number lines on here because in tomorrow's lessons with inequalities, you're going to need to be able to use those. Alright? Alright, next thing we want you to do is we want you to complete the WISC and be prepared to discuss this lesson in class and ask any questions. I hope you have a nice evening. We'll see you in class tomorrow.